You send one message. It sits there unread for 6 hours. By hour 2, you've already decided they're mad at you. By hour 4, you've rewritten the message in your head 11 different ways. By hour 6, you've basically ended a friendship that, as far as you know, is completely fine. That's not weakness. That's not you being too sensitive. That's a very old alarm system going off for a threat it was never built to evaluate. And it's not just messages. It's the meeting that got rescheduled with no explanation. The look on your friend's face you can't quite read. The little red notification bubble that could be nothing or could be the start of a problem you're now bracing for. None of these things are dangerous. Your body doesn't seem to have gotten that memo. Here's the strange part nobody tells you. Your ancestors dealt with actual, real, life-ending threats on a semi-regular basis. Famine, predators, violence between groups, losing a child before their 5th birthday, which for most of human history was closer to normal than rare. And somehow, generation after generation, they kept going. They rebuilt. They had more children. They passed down stories, skills, entire cultures. You, on the other hand, can get derailed by a Slack message with a slightly cold tone. So what happened? Did we get weaker? Did evolution somehow make the human mind less tough over time? That's the obvious answer. It's also almost certainly wrong, and the real explanation is a lot more interesting than people use to be tougher. Let's start with what scientists actually know about resilience, because for a long time, even psychologist Martin Seligman ran a now famous series of experiments where dogs were exposed to something bad they couldn't control. Later, even when escape became possible, many of them just stopped trying. They laid down and took it. Seligman called this learned helplessness. And for years, it became the default explanation for why people give up under stress. Enough bad experiences, the theory went, and eventually your brain just decides resistance is pointless. It's a compelling idea. It's also incomplete because it misses something huge. Not everyone who goes through hardship ends up broken by it. In fact, most don't. That's where Columbia University psychologist George Bonanno's research comes in, and it flips the whole narrative. Bonanno spent decades studying how people respond to genuinely severe events, things like losing a spouse or surviving a major disaster. His findings surprised a lot of people in his own field. The majority of individuals who go through serious trauma do not develop long-term dysfunction. Most of them adapt. Most of them recover functioning within a matter of months, not because they suppress what happened, but because human minds appear to be built with a kind of default setting toward bouncing back. Wait, so if that's true, if resilience is closer to the default setting than the exception, why does modern life feel like the opposite? Why does a single unread text message feel like a 5-alarm emergency? Here's the piece that makes this whole picture click into place. Resilience was never really about how big the threat was. It was about whether the threat had a predator either attacked or it didn't. A famine season eventually broke, one way or another. A conflict with a rival group resolved, for better or worse. Even brutal events had edges. Your ancestors' nervous systems evolved to spike hard during a threat, and then, critically, come back down once it passed. That downslope, that return to baseline, is not a minor detail. It's arguably the entire mechanism resilience runs on. Modern stress mostly doesn't have edges. An unread message can stay unread indefinitely. A vague comment from your boss can sit unresolved for a week. A slight from a friend can go unaddressed forever because nobody actually confronts anything anymore. They just quietly withdraw. Your alarm system fires exactly like it's supposed to. What's missing is the part where the threat actually resolves and your body gets the all-clear signal it was designed to expect. You're not fragile. You're running ancient hardware built for threats with endings in a world that specializes in threats that just linger. And this is where the story gets even stranger, because it turns out struggle itself isn't the enemy of resilience. In some cases, Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun spent years studying people after major hardship, things like illness, loss, or disaster, and they found something that shouldn't make sense at first glance. A significant number of people didn't just recover. They came out the other side reporting a stronger sense of purpose, deeper relationships, or a clearer understanding of their own priorities than they had before. Tedeschi and Calhoun called this post-traumatic growth, and it's not the same thing as simply getting over it. Something about surviving real difficulty appeared to rebuild these people into a slightly different and in some ways sturdier version of themselves. That should sound almost backwards. Difficulty making someone more capable, not less. It runs against basically every instinct you have about protecting yourself, and probably every instinct you have about protecting people you love. The natural move is to shield them from hard things. The research suggests that move, taken too far, might be quietly working against the exact strength you're trying to build. But it lines up with something researchers now call stress inoculation, the idea that moderate, manageable doses of adversity can actually train your nervous system the same way a workout trains a muscle. Not by avoiding hard things, by surviving them and learning
This is the
on a
logic
bodily
behind
level. Why
that
exposure-based approaches are so common in clinical treatment for anxiety today. You don't build tolerance for a feared situation by avoiding it forever. You build it by facing a manageable version of it, surviving that, and letting your nervous system update its own prediction of what you can handle. The dose matters enormously. Overwhelming stress can absolutely cause harm rather than growth, but some level of friction appears to be doing real work, not just something to be endured, which raises an uncomfortable question about modern life. If resilience is partly built through experiencing manageable difficulty and successfully getting through it, what happens to a person whose environment is engineered to remove almost all of that? Look at how much of modern life is designed around friction removal. Same-day delivery. Instantanéen. Skip the line. Cancel anytime. No hard conversations required. Think about how a disagreement used to force two people into the same room, where it had to get resolved one way or another. Now it can just dissolve into silence, a muted notification, a slow fade nobody ever officially closes. None of that is bad on its own. But every one of those conveniences is also, quietly, one fewer rep at the gym your nervous system needs to stay strong. You're not weak because you struggle with small setbacks. You might just be undertrained because the environment you live in has never asked you practice. And there's a second piece to this puzzle that might matter even more than the resolution problem. And it has nothing to do with how tough was almost never faced alone. A predator near camp, a bad hunting season, a death in the group, these things happened to everyone at once, and everyone dealt with it together. There was no version of ancient life where you sat with a threat by yourself in a quiet room for 6 hours. Someone was always right there. That matters more than it sounds like because of what researcher Naomi Eisenberger found when she studied social rejection at UCLA. Using brain imaging, she showed that being excluded by a group activates some of the same neural regions involved in processing physical pain. Your brain does not treat social disconnection as a minor inconvenience. It treats it as an injury, which means isolation itself is a stressor on top of whatever you're already dealing with. And it's one your ancestors almost never had to face without backup. You, on the other hand, might work from home, live states away from your family, and spend more hours a day looking at a screen than talking to another human face to face. So when something stressful happens, you're not just facing the original problem. You're facing it with a support system that, for most of human history, would have been sitting right beside you and is now, at best, a text thread. Think about the last time something genuinely difficult happened to you, something you didn't choose and couldn't control. Chances are you got through it. Not painlessly, not gracefully, necessarily, but you're here, reading this, which means whatever it was, you outlasted it. That's not a small fact. According to Bonanno's research, that outcome, coming through hard things reasonably intact, isn't the exception that makes you unusually strong. It's closer to the human default. You are, quite literally, descended from an unbroken line of people who faced worse and kept the species going. So maybe the goal was never to eliminate the small stuff, the unread messages, the vague comments, the everyday friction that modern life is built out of. Maybe the goal is remembering what that alarm system was actually built to survive and giving it what it's been waiting for the whole time, an ending. Answer the message. Have the conversation. Let the threat resolve instead of leaving it hanging in a place your nervous system was never designed to tolerate. Your ancestors weren't tougher than you. They just lived in a world that, brutal as it was, eventually let them exhale, and they almost never had to do it by themselves. Maybe resilience was never about building a mind so strong nothing gets in. That version of the idea, the unshakable, nothing phases me version, might actually be pointing in the wrong direction entirely. Maybe real resilience looks more like a mind that still knows how to come back down, and a life structured so it doesn't have to do that alone. That message that's been sitting unread for 6 hours? Answer it. Not because the world will end if you don't. Because somewhere in you, a very old system is just waiting for the part where the threat finally passes.